Lock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Welcome to this week's episode of First Case. Today, Chris and I are talking all about suture. And, you know, suture is one of those things that I got taught absolutely nothing about when I started in the OR. It was just this natural assumption that I would know to go get a 3O monocryl or to go get a 1 vicryl on a CT1. And I'm like, what does this mean? Ones and zeros and two O's and all this. And I had no idea. And I did not get Periop 101. It was, you have a pulse, you're breathing, here's the OR, go work. And so I didn't learn anything about suture or the fact that some suture can be used on skin. Some suture can, and I still get lessons in suture sometimes because I offer a certain suture like, oh no, this cannot be used in the bowel. I'm like, oh, I had no idea. I'm sorry. And so like, there's all these variables, and then you throw in free needles, and then you throw in pops, and you throw in all these other things, and suture just is its own subject.
So cool.
Yeah, I know, right? But in a season talking about why and thinking about something that I knew absolutely nothing about when I started, but I was expected to know all the things about, I figured this is a great topic and one we should discuss. And Chris, you are the educator. You educate your students on these things.
Yes.
So let's talk about suture today.
I would love to talk about suture. Which one? No.
All right. So when we're talking about suture, what is it that we're talking about?
That's a really good question, right? Because what we're typically talking about is a needle that is swaged onto a piece of thread. And swaged means that the needle and thread actually are combined into one. So if you think, do you sew? I mean,
yes, I do. I quilt, actually.
Cool. You're so good. You're so talented. I can put on a button. That's about it, right? Yeah. But so typically when someone sews, it's a needle that has a hole in it, and then we loop the suture through it. Well, when you do that, that loop makes a bigger hole than what it would if the needle and the thread were combined into one. Right? Well, we don't want a big hole left in whatever it is that we are trying to tie together. We want that hole to stay the same throughout. So what we do is we swage or we clamp the needle onto that thread, and it should stay the entire time we're using it. Knock on wood, right? And we want that whole thing to be the same. So when we say suture, we are talking about a needle that is swaged or clamped onto a sterile piece of thread, and that is sterilized. Thank you, Lord. Yeah.
Yes, thank God, right?
Yes,
that's the first thing. We've got a nice sterile thread, sterile needle, and they all come in a lot of different sizes. And that was the thing that really threw me when I first started in the OR. All this terminology, 1, 2, or O, or 2O, 3O, 4O, 12O.
So many choices.
Yeah, all these choices. What do all of those numbers tell us?
So those numbers are actually telling us what the size of the suture is, or the diameter of the suture itself, right? And they come in different sizes. And typically the number is, and here's where it gets confusing, right? If it has a dash O behind it, then the number is, here's where it goes. So we have all the way from number 7 is the largest suture that we typically have, right?
I've never seen a 7. I only see O, 1, and 2. I've never seen 7.
So do you know where 7s are typically used?
No.
Veterinary offices.
Oh,
yeah, because they, animal sciences
larger
also
animals.
Need
yes, you're right.
Sterile suture, right? So suture comes in number 7, and then the smallest suture that we use is 12-O.
Yeah, I've had to use those.
Yes. And we typically use those.
Don't lose it ever because you can't find it.
You can't see it. So in ophthalmological surgery. So we need to use very, very small suture, and typically you need to use that in the eye. So the number is, it goes from number 1 to number 7, and 1 is smaller than 7 unless it has a -O. Then the number gets, then a 2O, a 2-O is then larger than a 10-O.
Right.
So once it has a -O, the larger the number, the smaller the suture. If it has no -O, the larger the number, the larger the suture.
You know, why do we have to make it hard? I don't understand why we have to make it hard.
Because it's medicine. Like, why can't we just call something a belly button? Why do we have to call it an umbilicus, right?
But we are kind of used to that, you know, when we have our, you know, different IV sizes or, you know, your Foley catheter sizes. Although some of them, the numbers, I always get mixed up. Which one of these, the numbers are going up and, you know, versus down, and which is bigger or smaller. And so it would be great if there was some consistency, but why in the world would we do that? Okay, here's another question before we actually get into more details, because this is one I've always wondered. We say 1, we say 2, we say 12, but we say O. We don't say 0. Why do we do that?
I don't know.
Yeah, we just do. And we don't say dash.
And we don't say dash. So if I want a 4O vicryl, what we're looking at when we look at the box is a 4-O, right? But we say 4O vicryl. We don't say 40, which when we're documenting things, you know, we're so very particular about documenting, and, you know, there are so many rules, like you can't use CC anymore. You have to use ML, and we have to make sure we don't have a leading 0, but we have to have an ending. I mean, we have to have a leading 0, but we don't use a trailing 0. I mean, there are so many rules and then exceptions to the rules, but yeah, specific to the lingo that we use for suture, you're never going to have anyone say a -O. So
if you're new and you're listening, let us save you from any jokes and any embarrassment. Do not say -O or -0. It's a 4O, a 5O, 11O. Whatever.
12O. Yeah, absolutely. So that's how it is. And they're never going to ask you for a number 7 suture.
No,
it's just the number.
I don't think I've ever seen anything bigger than a 2 in my ORs.
Yeah. Especially in ortho. Yeah. I can see how you would use that for anchors and things like that. And the needle is swaged. So lots of different choices between needles and sutures and that kind of thing. But there are some kind of hints, a few tricks of the trade. We'll try to talk to those.
Yeah. Well, let's actually talk about one now that tips us off to something about the needle and the thread, and that's a pop or a pop off. Those are different than your other sutures. Why are they different?
So those are called control release. And so there are hints on the boxes in all sutures. So if you're a newbie and you're going to pull suture for a case, or God forbid someone sent you as a runner, and not only have they sent you to go find the Otis elevator.
Oh, you poor soul. I'm so sorry. Just don't even bother.
Yeah, it's a joke. Yeah,
a sterile set of fallopian tubes. Yeah, don't look for those either. Yeah, you're not going to find them.
They're not real. Yeah. But when you look on a box, if it says CR-8, which is control release, that is the same thing as those of us who've been in the OR for a long time are going to call a pop-off. And so when we talked about the swage, there are different tensions that they can swage these needles on. And there are some that are designed to be able to throw a few stitches, and then you can easily pop off the thread from the needle. And so those are used not for continuous suturing, right? So for a suture that is supposed to be used and sutured for long incisions, those are just for maybe to throw a couple of stitches and then immediately quickly release that suture needle to be able to be given safely on the needle driver in the neutral zone to the surgical technologist. Okay.
The educator and her soapbox is coming out, but yes, that's correct.
But yeah. And they usually come in multiple packages. So you'll be able to read that package. And then they, of course, come in different forms. So typically they are a vicryl suture, and you'll see them in a purple box. So those of you who are going to the core, look for the purple box, and they are a flat package, and you will see CR/8 on them. So, and then of course those pop-offs come in different sizes, but typically with an SH or a PS-2 or 4 needle.
Exactly. Okay. So another thing that always tripped me up when I was new too, and I will be honest, sometimes I still forget this when I have multiple sutures and I forget. The thread's not always the same color. And so you might go get a Vicryl and it might be purple, or you might go get one and it's clear. And then you take, or I guess whatever this color is, and you take it to him like, no, I need violet, or I don't want violet. I want this other. And why do they make different colors of the suture?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of them are impregnated with a dye, right? And some of them are impregnated without one. And then some of them are also coated. So some have they're coated to prevent drag. So when we are in certain tissues, and this goes back to the different types of thread or suture, right? Because we have, basically there's 4 kinds, right? So we have multifilament, monofilament, and then we have absorbable suture or non-absorbable suture. And all 4 of those things can be intertwined. And so multifilament suture is one that has multiple strands that are braided together. So if you think of like a fiber optic cable, right? Kind of something like that. Those are really great because their tensile strength and their ability to be strong, we can use that in a lot of different tissue that needs that strength, because we want to match the strength of the suture with the type of tissue that we're suturing, right? And then, but when you braid a lot of things together, and if you think about like a rug in your house, right? Or if you just think about, I think about my hair. Bless it when it's braided. It has a lot of different strands and those things. And so when you're dragging it through certain tissue, that can cause friction and that can irritate the tissue around it. So what we can do is we put coating on it, and that coating can decrease that tissue drag, which can make the suture flow through the tissue easier and make it easier to suture that tissue together, and can decrease inflammation, and decreasing inflammation decreases pain, and then helps also to make a better scar line. And so, of course, in plastics, that makes a big difference.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there are also different kinds. So there's also, when you see coated Vicryl, that can be dyed or undyed, but then also we have like different types of suture that's coated with an antibacterial coating as well. That's been like the newest thing. So some are impregnated with this antibacterial coating, especially those multifilament sutures, because you never want to use a multifilament suture on an infected area or something that typically has bacteria that live in it. So one example of that is bowel. So we never want to use a multifilament suture anywhere near bowel, because bowel has bacteria, which inside your bowel is awesome. E. coli, live there, love it, go party, right? But anytime that E. coli gets outside of the bowel, now you have a bad day. Well, we don't want to use that because all of those lines, they act like a super highway, right? For that infection to then travel outside of that area and go spread itself to other parts of the body. And now we have sepsis that can occur. So you always want to use a monofilament suture anywhere that you are susceptible to infection or there's infection already present. And so what these suture competitors have been doing is they've been coating them with this antibacterial coating. And they're like, no, it's cool to use our suture because look, we have now an antibiotic on it. But guess what? What if your patient is allergic to that antibiotic? Oh,
yeah. My surgeons won't use the coated ones with antibacterial coating. They're like, no, I don't want that. I'm like,
no.
Oh, okay. Seems fancy to me, but okay, we'll go get the other one.
And that's a lot of the reason why. And so as the surge tech or whoever's pulling that suture, you have to pay attention to your patient's allergies. Because if your patient has an allergy to that family of antibiotics and you
let's not go put it in their body.
Right. I don't want to have that. I don't want to have to bring that patient back because of it. So all of these nuances, they're just very important to know.
There are a lot of them. Yeah.
There are. And then we use absorbable or non-absorbable. And these monofilament or multifilament suture can be either absorbable or non-absorbable. And there are reasons why you would use one or the other as well.
All right. So let's just feed into that then. So obviously when we're working with the bowel, a lot of those things are absorbable, or deep inside the body. A lot of that stuff is absorbable, but it's not always, because you might use an Ethibond suture and it doesn't go anywhere after you've put an Ethibond. It's still there later. So thinking of absorbable versus non-absorbable, where do we see those sutures get used?
So we want to time the suturing and the absorbability of the suture with the healing rate of that particular tissue. Just like we want to have the strength of the tissue the strength of the suture match the strength of the tissue. So all of these things come into play. For example, if I am going to suture the uterus after we have done a C-section, that uterus, if you think about it, it is muscular, it is fibrous, it is so strong, and there are so many layers that I'm going to use a really strong suture, and I'm going to do multiple layers of suturing in order to make sure that that uterus is together and that it matches the strength of the tissue lining. And then because there's so many layers of it, I need that suture to then absorb at the same rate that that tissue is going to heal. So I need thicker suture, which is usually a 1-0 or a 2-0. And then I'm going to use probably a PDS, which is a monofilament suture, because there is a ton of blood and we had amniotic fluid and possible meconium, which is susceptible to infection. So we're not going to be using some multifilament suture. So we're going to use a really strong monofilament suture that is really strong so that it doesn't dehisce. And then we're going to use a monofilament, and we're going to use an absorbable one that slowly absorbs at the same rate that that uterus is going to heal, so that it doesn't absorb faster. And then we have a really bad
no support.
Yeah.
Right.
But then there are some instances where we never want that suture to heal. And a really great example of this is in our vascular and our cardiovascular room.
Right?
Yeah. So if I'm going to put a new mitral valve in you, right, I really don't ever want that thing to move, ever. And so we're going to use non-absorbable suture. And we are going to use a lot of it. We're going to use it.
Very technical terms.
Yes, absolute, right? And then that's also where some of that color coding comes in, because when we are doing suturing, and we are doing a lot of suturing in a small place in a circular manner, surgeons will do color coding. So they'll do one throw of green, one throw of white, one throw of green, one throw of white, so that we don't get don't cross the streams, right? Ghostbusters, right? Yeah. So you want to make sure, because we don't tie them with, sometimes when we are throwing suture in cardiovascular and vascular surgery, we don't tie them until we've gotten all of our suture thrown, because we want tension to be equal. So we throw the suture and we clamp them. And then once all the suture is thrown, we push down that valve into the perfect spot. And then we make sure everything's even, everything is sealed. We're totally good to go. And then we start tying knots, and we do it the same way a dude like putting a tire on is going to tighten lug nuts in a certain order. Like that's the same thing we do. Do you see the educator coming out?
I am. Yeah. If y'all could only see the hand motion she's making as she is talking, but it does actually go along with it very well and help make the visual. But
if y'all chop my hands off, I can no longer talk.
She can never speak. Yeah. Well, this is actually very interesting because, yes, we all know I do orthopedics. I've also done a whole lot of plastics. I'm very familiar with plastic sutures and with orthopedics. And obviously, you end up in general sometimes, you end up in other cases. Vascular, though, has not been a specialty that has very often been at our facilities. And I've recently had to work with a vascular surgeon a time or two, and it has been a very unique experience.
How's that going?
Yeah. Not good, really. Let's be honest. But like I gave him the wrong suture. I did not know about anything really that you just told me about, like suturing it all and then tying it later, and then. We all know when we get a new surgeon and they've got this prep card, you're like, well, I'll just put all the suture over here and I'll just wait till he tells me what he wants, because I don't really know that my prep card is really right yet, because he's still kind of new, and you just ask me for it and I will throw you what you need. Well, the suture cart, the suture we had in the room wasn't exactly right. He really wants to use pop-offs. He didn't want to have anything that wasn't a pop, and I didn't know that. Or anyway, let's just say it's the most recent time I've had a surgeon yell at me, and I was very not happy. But understanding why they sew like they do, or why they are going to need suture in a certain way, it makes perfect sense that they would probably want to pop off, that that's much quicker, that they would want these certain things. But also, hello, it's vascular. We're going to be sewing a lot of stuff up. They probably do want their sutures on the table at the beginning. But because he was new, I was like, let me see what he wants before I just waste. I don't want to waste anything, Sure. Anyway, lesson learned. We don't need to go through all of my OR problems, but it does make a connection to, learning about suture. Okay. So as we wrap this up, go ahead. Do you want to add something else?
No, I just was going to say, like, Prolene is probably the most commonly known non-absorbable monofilament suture that we use, especially in cardiovascular, right? It has tensile strength. Like you can pull it like a rubber band and it's not going to break. And that's really cool too, because we use it in valves and in vessels that, what do our vessels do, right? Especially as blood pressure comes in arteries. So they dilate and they constrict, and you want that suture to move with it. But the funny fact is, and so I have a forensics background, like I wanted to be a forensic pathologist, and so we can go down that road. But when I interned at a medical examiner's office, like they would do studies on decomposing bodies. And when they did these studies, Prolene was still intact. Like you could still see the Prolene from even when the body is like, ashes to ashes, right? Dust to dust. And so that's the big joke. Like, you will be dead and gone and Prolene will still be here. Yes. So anyway, I've seen it for myself. Right. So yeah.
That is crazy.
So yeah, you don't ever want to use Prolene on the fascia, for God's sake, because the fascia will start to go off on its own. But if you ever have a heart, go ahead. Any vessel you want, go ahead and use Prolene. It's going to stay there.
Okay. All right. So you have mentioned different suture types as we've talked, but as we wrap this conversation up, I kind of want to just really quickly hit some of the highlights on these suture that we see all the time. So let's start with Vicryl. We've mentioned it a little bit already, but where are we going to use it a lot? Is it a monofilament? Is it a multifilament? What is it? And all the details.
Sure. So Vicryl is probably the most commonly used suture out there. And so it's a multifilament suture, and it is a absorbable suture, and it comes with tons of different needles. So get used to the suture, but I have to understand that you have to pay attention to the needle that is on it, because we could do an entire other episode just on needles, and maybe we should.
We should, yeah.
Yeah. It comes dyed and it comes undyed. But the cool thing is that look for the purple box. So Vicryl comes in a purple box, but beware that just because the box is purple doesn't mean that suture is dyed violet. So you still have to look at the suture box, because it'll say undyed or it'll say violet or dyed. But yeah, it's used pretty much everywhere. And then pay attention. It'll say Vicryl Plus if it has that dadgum antibacterial coating on it. And when in doubt, if you have your preference card, look at the actual lot number. So if it says J496G, like that means 40 Vicryl on a P3. Don't ask me why I know that, but that's what it's like PTSD. I don't know. That's what we use the most often in don't ask.
Wow. I did not realize the numbers would actually tell you the needle size.
Yeah. J494G is a P340 Vicryl.
Oh my gosh. That's
yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you know entirely too much, but let's keep going. Okay. So we've got monocryl. I used a lot of monocryl in plastics. Of course, we use that so much, but what are we using it for?
Monocryl is also an absorbable suture, but it's a monofilament. And a 4L monocryl on a PS-2 is the most commonly used suture for skin closure. It's going to be undyed. It's typically almost clear. And the reason that we do that is because it makes the prettiest suture line, right? And the patient's perception, what they look like on the outside, how good they look on the outside is what they perceive how well we did on the inside. So having that beautiful suture line and scar line increases patient satisfaction. So Absolutely. A monocryl, and remember, having a monofilament suture is better in areas where you think you might be susceptible to infection, right? Because it's not a superhighway for germs. And where are we most susceptible to infection? On the incision line after the patient leaves, because we're not really sure they're going to take care of that line.
Yeah, absolutely. No, monocryl absolutely makes beautiful closures. Of course, you would not want a dyed suture at the top of the skin. Nobody wants a sudden tattoo of a line across their body when you close their suture. I know I would prefer monocryl closure to, say, staples or something else.
Please, Lord, yeah.
Please, or let's not do the whole tying and knotting thing where you have all the dots going along the line of your suture. We see that a lot in
so 4L monocryl on a PS2, newbies. When in doubt, make sure you pull a couple of those.
All right, so let's cover a couple more. We certainly can't cover all of them, but some common ones. You mentioned Prolene already. Let's talk about Ethylon, though.
Ethylon. So that's a type of nylon suture, right? You see that all across the board. But nylon is one of our non-synthetic sutures. So we use nylon in sewing, right? I use nylon to sew a button, and that's about as far as I go, right? But we use that. It's a natural suture. Some of them are coated because that natural suture, right, is going to do a lot of tissue drag. So you see it a lot in ortho surgeries. They actually have a type of it that's called Neurolon that we use in neurosurgeries and spines. So I think you're seeing it as our synthetic sutures are getting better and better and better. You're going to see less and less of our nylon sutures being used, but a lot of our nylon sutures and our silk sutures are also being used for drain stitches. So you see that used outside of the body and in the ER and in a lot of our quick kits, as you will. So like if we're going to do in a central line and things of that nature. So yeah.
Yep, and if you got a drain, grab a nylon. You're going to need it.
Grab a nylon. Yeah. When in doubt, it's a black suture. Everybody can see it. You never want to use a clear suture when you have an external drain. That's another little tip. So anytime you're going to do a drain stitch and you're going to put it outside of the body, you always want to use a black suture. And the reason we do that is because it's different from the color of the drain. You want people to see that. And so it's this big hint like, hey, dude, this is coming out of the skin. Don't touch it. Yeah. So there's a reason why.
It's a reason why it's there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there is a world of suture. Last one, because we do need to wrap up our conversation. Let's talk about PDS because you have mentioned it already and we see that one a lot too. So what do we need to know about PDS?
So PDS is actually the cool name. It's called polydioxanone.
Well, that's a fancy word. Well, what's that?
That's why that's why we call it PDS.
PDS.
Yeah. So it's really cool. It's an absorbable suture. All right. But it's a monofilament and it's really, really strong. It too comes in like violet or it comes in like the clear suture and it's used in a lot of the same ways that Vicryl is used. So you can think of it as the monofilament Vicryl. So it's used in a lot of the same areas that Vicryl is used. It's used in a lot of the same ways because it comes in a clear and violet dyed. It has the same opportunities, but when you don't want to use a multifilament because of all those, reasons that we've talked about, they're going to use PDS. And so that's why we do that. And a lot of times a monofilament, we talked about that tensile strength and that memory and that ability to be more flexible and pull it. Anytime you have a multifilament or a braid, it's not going to have that flexibility that you want. And sometimes we want it to match the tissue. And so when you have tissue that's expanding naturally, you want suture that's still going to hold, but also expand naturally. And Vicryl's not going to do that. So then we're going to go with PDS because nobody wants to say polydiaxonal.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, I feel like Megamind as my brain has grown because you have taught me things that I honestly have never been taught. I've never heard. And I've sat in different, vendor presentations on different sutures, and you pick up different things and learn them over the years as surgeons tell you because you pulled the wrong one, why you should have pulled the other one. So you learn bits and pieces, but to just sit down and focus on the science of suture, and we really only scratch the surface of everything that there is to know about our sutures. But holy smokes, Chris, this was phenomenal.
So much fun. Can I just give you our last, to wrap it up?
Please do.
As a surgical technologist, for any of you that are out there, we preload suture all the time, right? Because you're trying to look good. You want to make sure your suture's ready to go. That way, if that surgeon's asking for it, you can snap it on there. The one suture you should never, ever preload is chromic or plain gut suture. Do not ever load chromic or plain gut.
And why not, Chris?
Because the packaging has alcohol in it and it needs to stay in there until you're ready to use it. Because if you preload it, that alcohol will evaporate and now you have compromised the integrity of the suture and it will not do what you need it to do. So preload, go be a rock star all you want, except for chromic. Don't use it in the bowel, and do not preload chromic suture. Keep it in the package until your surgeon asks for it, and then inhale.
Breathe the vapors.
Breathe the vapors, because you just woke up.
Exactly. All right. Well, that is perfect. That is an excellent explanation of why we don't do certain things and why we should be doing things a certain way. So, Chris, thank you so much for teaching me, teaching our audience more about suture. We work with it every single day. It only makes sense that we know what we're working with. So thank you
for letting me nerd out on
Absolutely.
suture.
You can do that anytime you want. Everyone, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning right alongside me, at least, as we have learned this season. Thank you for listening. And on behalf of Chris, myself, and our entire team, thanks for listening to First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.